There is no horror franchise more iconic, more influential, or more inconsistent than Halloween. One of these films is a genuine masterpiece that invented an entire genre. Others are so catastrophically bad that they should come with an apology attached. 13 films across multiple timelines, reboots, remakes, and reimaginings, and I have watched every single one of them so I can tell you exactly which ones deserve your time and which ones deserve to be buried in a cornfield in Haddonfield. This is every Halloween movie ranked from worst to best, and Halloween 3 might not be last. Hold that thought. Starting at the bottom, firmly in the category of films that never should have existed. Halloween. The Curse of Michael Myers from 1995 is the single most incoherent film in the franchise, and that is an enormous achievement given the competition. After years of teasing a mysterious man in black with a strange symbol, this film decided to explain that Michael Myers is being controlled by an ancient Celtic cult called the Thorn that has cursed him to kill his entire family in order to appease pagan gods. That is the actual plot. They also gave him a baby to protect at one point. The production was so troubled and so chaotic that two completely different versions of the film exist, and neither one of them is good. The theatrical cut is confusing. The producer's cut is differently confusing. Donald Pleasance was clearly exhausted. Paul Rudd was in this film before anyone on Earth knew who Paul Rudd was, and somehow that detail is the most disturbing thing about it. This is what happens when a franchise runs out of ideas and tries to compensate with mythology so convoluted that even the people making it couldn't agree on what was happening. F tier, no hesitation. Halloween Resurrection from 2002 also lives in F tier, and it might actually be worse than Curse, which is genuinely impressive. This film opens by retconning the ending of H20 and killing Laurie Strode in a psychiatric hospital. Laurie Strode, the woman who survived 4 decades of Michael Myers, dead in the first 10 minutes so the film can pivot to a reality television show where teenagers spend a night in the Myers house while cameras broadcast it live online. Busta Rhymes plays the producer of this internet show, and he does not play it subtly. In the film's climax, Busta Rhymes karate chops Michael Myers and says the line, "Trick or treat, motherfucker," to Michael Myers' face, and somehow Michael does not immediately leave the building out of pure embarrassment. Jamie Lee Curtis filmed her scenes in 2 days. She knew, everyone knew, the franchise needed to be taken behind a barn and put down after this film, and thankfully a 16-year gap before the next entry was the closest thing to mercy the series received. Moving into D tier, where we find films that are bad, but at least have the decency not to be actively insulting. Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers from 1989, earns its place here by doing something almost unforgivable. Halloween 4 had one of the best endings in the entire franchise. Little Jamie Lloyd, the young niece of Michael Myers, reaches the top of the stairs in a clown costume covered in blood while the adults stare up at her in horror. The clear implication being that the evil had transferred and she was now the threat. It was bold, it was dark, and it completely recontextualized the entire film you just watched. Halloween 5 walked every single bit of that back within its opening minutes. Jamie was fine, the evil transfer was mostly ignored, and the film spent the rest of its runtime introducing a mysterious man in black who shows up periodically and does nothing. A subplot that wouldn't be resolved for another 6 years in Curse of Michael Myers. Do not tease a mystery in 1989 and resolve it in 1995 with a pagan cult. That is not how you treat your audience. Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 from 2009 also belongs in D tier. This is the film where Rob Zombie committed fully to the artistic vision that his first Halloween only hinted at. And that vision involved Michael Myers removing his mask, having extended hallucinations of his dead mother dressed in white leading a white horse through darkness while Sherry Moon Zombie delivers monologues, and Laurie Strode descending into a breakdown that the film doesn't have the structural stability to support. There are individual sequences in this film that are genuinely terrifying. Rob Zombie knows how to create physical threat and visceral horror, but the film is so relentlessly ugly and nihilistic that watching it feels less like a horror experience and more like spending 90 minutes being yelled at by someone who's very angry but not entirely sure why. Now, C tier, where we find films that range from disappointing to actually interesting depending on how you approach them. Rob Zombie's Halloween from 2007 is a C tier film, and here is the most controversial statement in this entire ranking. It is not a bad film. As a standalone horror movie about a giant, unstoppable killer, it works. Tyler Mane is physically the most imposing Michael Myers in the franchise's history, and several of the kills are brutally effective. The problem is that it's a Halloween film, and the thing that makes Michael Myers terrifying is not his size or his backstory. It's the total absence of backstory. The original film works because Michael has no explanation. Rob Zombie spent the first 40 minutes explaining him, which is the single thing you must never do with this character. Once you understand Michael Myers, he stops being the shape and becomes just a very large man with a difficult childhood and a knife. C tier. Halloween Kills from 2021 sits in C tier for different reasons. The kills are extraordinary. This film has some of the most creative and brutal Michael Myers kill sequences in the franchise's history. James Jude Courtney plays Michael with a physicality and aggression that makes every encounter feel genuinely lethal. But the film also has a mob mentality subplot involving the survivors of the original 1978 attack rallying Haddonfield against Michael Myers. And that subplot includes the infamous "Evil Dies Tonight" chant that became a meme for all the wrong reasons. The film was trying to say something about how fear turns ordinary people into something dangerous, and it was a genuinely ambitious idea for a Halloween film. The execution was just not there. The mob becomes unintentionally comedic in a film that desperately needs to be taken seriously. Half of Halloween Kills is a great Halloween movie. The other half is a different film that wandered in from somewhere else. Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, from 1982, belongs in C tier, and yes, I know that is going to upset some of you who expected it to be last. Here is the thing about Halloween 3. When it came out in 1982, audiences were furious because Michael Myers wasn't in it. The entire premise, a standalone anthology film about a silver shamrock mask company using ancient Celtic magic to kill children on Halloween night, felt like a betrayal of everything the franchise had built. And that fury was legitimate at the time. But strip away the Halloween branding and what you have is a genuinely weird, deeply unsettling piece of early 1980s horror with practical effects that are still disturbing, a villain with an actual ideology, and a jingle that will live in your skull rent-free until you die. It killed its child characters in ways that 1982 audiences were not remotely prepared for. It had a bleakly nihilistic ending, and it was trying to do something genuinely creative with a franchise that was already becoming formulaic after only 2 films. Halloween 3 is not a good Halloween film, it is a fascinating horror film that deserved to exist under a different name. C tier, and I will not apologize. Into B tier, where the franchise starts delivering on what it promises. Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers from 1988, earns its placement here simply by understanding the formula and executing it cleanly. After Halloween 3's Michael-free experiment proved commercially disastrous, the franchise brought him back and gave him a new target in Jamie Lloyd, the young daughter of Laurie Strode. Danielle Harris gave a child performance that was so genuinely affecting that it elevated every scene she was in. The film builds genuine dread through atmosphere, rather than relying entirely on kills. Dr. Loomis chasing Michael across rural Illinois has an urgency that the middle-tier sequels never matched. And that ending, which Halloween 5 subsequently ruined, is bold enough to belong in a much better film. If the franchise had been brave enough to follow through on what Halloween 4 set up, it might have produced something genuinely great. Instead, it produced Halloween 5. But Halloween 4 itself is a legitimate entry. Halloween 2 from 1981 also sits in B tier, and this placement comes with a significant caveat. As a standalone film, Halloween 2 is a perfectly competent hospital slasher that continues the original story in a logical direction. Laurie is in the hospital, Michael finds her, people die in various creative ways involving medical equipment. The hospital setting creates its own distinct atmosphere, and some of the sequences are genuinely effective. But the film also introduced the sibling twist, the revelation that Michael and Laurie are brother and sister, which retroactively gave Michael a motivation and partially undermined the faceless evil that made the original so frightening. John Carpenter has publicly stated he wrote the sibling connection because he was drunk when he wrote the script and didn't know what else to do, which is the most honest thing a filmmaker has ever said about a franchise-altering decision. The film works despite that twist, not because of it. Into A tier, where every film deserves genuine respect and has something real to offer. Halloween Ends from 2022 earns A tier, and I know exactly how many of you are already angry about that. This film is deeply divisive for a reason. It spends a significant portion of its runtime following a new character named Corey Cunningham, who the audience was never asked to invest in, and it uses Michael Myers as a background presence for most of its runtime in the final chapter of a trilogy that was entirely built around him. Those are legitimate criticisms. But Halloween Ends was trying to do something that no Halloween film had ever attempted. It was trying to say that evil is contagious, that trauma spreads between people, that the shadow Michael Myers cast over Haddonfield for 45 years shaped the entire community into something darker. That is an ambitious thematic statement for a slasher franchise. The final confrontation between Laurie and Michael is everything the trilogy was building toward. The film made a bet that ambition was worth more than formula. Most audiences disagreed. I think it was the right bet, even if the execution was imperfect. A tier. Halloween H. 20 years later from 1998 absolutely belongs in A tier and doesn't get nearly enough credit for what it did for the franchise. After the disaster of Resurrection and the incoherence of the Curse storyline, H20 did something genuinely brave. It ignored every sequel except Halloween 2 and gave Laurie Strode back to the audience as a fully realized adult character 20 years after the original events. Jamie Lee Curtis gave a performance of real emotional depth, and the film's best decision was making Laurie someone who was clearly still haunted and clearly still functioning despite that haunting. The climax where Laurie stops running and decides to hunt Michael instead is one of the most cathartic moments in the franchise. For a brief window in 1998, this film felt like the definitive ending to the Michael and Laurie story. Halloween Resurrection tried to take that away from us. It failed. Halloween from 2018 also earns a tier for doing something that seemed almost impossible. David Gordon Green and Danny McBride stripped away 40 years of sequels, reboots, and retcons and made a direct continuation of the 1978 original that treated that film with genuine respect. The scene where Laurie's granddaughter asks her what happened to her, and Laurie has to explain Michael Myers to someone who grew up hearing only fragments of the story, is the best written scene in any Halloween film outside the original. Jamie Lee Curtis was extraordinary. The long tracking shot through the neighborhood following Michael as he methodically moves from house to house is technically one of the finest sequences in the franchise's history. Halloween 2018 understood that Michael Myers is most frightening when he is simply present. When he walks around a corner and you see that pale white mask and you feel the weight of everything that face represents. And at the top, alone in S tier, is the only film that could possibly be here. Halloween from 1978, directed by John Carpenter, is not just the best Halloween film, it is one of the 10 best horror films ever made. The score alone, that 5-note piano motif that Carpenter wrote himself and recorded himself on a budget of almost nothing, is arguably the most effective piece of horror music in cinema history. The film built its entire terror around absence rather than presence. You don't see Michael Myers for most of the film. You see the shape of him in doorways. You see him standing behind laundry on a clothesline. You see him sitting up in the background while a character in the foreground thinks she's safe. Carpenter understood that imagination is always more frightening than anything you can show, and he directed accordingly. Donald Pleasence's Loomis is the best performance in the franchise by a significant distance. Jamie Lee Curtis in her debut was extraordinary. And the film's final question, the pull back to the empty doorway, after Michael has apparently been shot and fallen from the balcony, followed by the cuts to every location in Haddonfield where he might be now, followed by the sound of his breathing over black, is one of the great endings in horror history. The Shape is not dead. He's just somewhere you can't see him. He's always somewhere you can't see him. That is the fundamental truth of Michael Myers, and every Halloween film that understood it, that embraced the emptiness rather than filling it with mythology or backstory or explanations, made a better film for it. That's all 13 Halloween films ranked. Drop your disagreements in the comments, and I know you have them. Where I put Halloween 3 alone is going to start arguments that will last until Halloween itself. Subscribe, because the next franchise deep dive is already coming, and it goes somewhere even more divisive.